Hiroshima 6, August 1945. A.B. 29, slides across a white summer sky, engines, even crew voices clipped to procedure. Colonel Paul Tibbets calls the run bombardier. Thomas Ferriby holds the sight's steady navigator. Dutch Van Kirk counts the last calm seconds to the initial point. Below them, staff officers of the 2nd General Army, under Field Marshal Shunroku Hata, pass morning dispatches inside Hiroshima Castle. The bomb bay opens. One metallic shape drops clean and begins to fall. A breath. Light arrives, first too bright to look at, then the hard edge of pressure that crushes air timber ribs. Windows implode as roofs lift. Streets twist into raw flame. Radios die mid-syllable. Dust slides sideways, and a black stem of cloud climbs where the center of the city was supposed to be. Hata survives, hands scorched, stepping into a courtyard that is no longer a courtyard, issuing orders no one can hear because the wires are gone and the phones are ash. Nagasaki 9 August 1945. Another B-29 turns above the ridgelines of Kyushu. Major Charles Sweeney fights fuel and weather after Kokura refuses them. The weaponeer Commander Frederick Ashworth arms the device. The bombardier catches a clear slit over the Urakami Valley. Release. The aircraft banks and climbs on instruments and stopwatch, not on curiosity. White core, then the same sudden absence, then the shock, arriving late like a slammed door. Steel folds. Factories open from the inside. Rail spurs smear into charcoal arcs. At Western District Army Headquarters, General Isamu Yokoyama. Aides grab files that burn as they lift them. Sirens start, then fail. Then only the dry hiss of a fire with no center remains. In both aircraft, the interphone stays short. Bomb away. Turn. Climb. Check manifold pressure. Check fuel. No cheering, only the list. In both cities, small scenes repeat without words. A streetcar stopped mid-bridge, passengers frozen where the light took their eyes. A ward lit white, then black. A fire crew turning toward heat that does not end. 2 dates, 2 flashes, 3 days apart. The crews vanish into blue air. The ground keeps burning. And then there is nothing, no music, no speeches, just a silence, heavy enough to bend the room around it. By early August 1945, the war's shape is narrow and terminal. Hiroshima on 6 August and Nagasaki on 9 August are not isolated fires in a long summer. They are 2 deliberate strikes designed to end the decision cycle itself. The launch point is Northfield Tinian, where a specially formed, tightly compartmentalized 509th Composite Group has trained to carry single weapons, whose effect must be understood as procedure, not spectacle. The authority chain is short and documented. The President sets guidance, the order passes from T. Handy to Carl Spaatz. Operational control sits with Curtis LeMay, and the delivery group under Paul Tibbets executes. Inside Tokyo, the structure is compact and brittle. The cabinet, under Kantaro Suzuki and the Supreme War Council, are split between fight-on and seek-terms factions. The emperor listens as ministries argue over words that cannot change material facts. In the target regions, 2nd General Army, under Shunroku Hata, covers Hiroshima's district. On Kyushu, Western District Army and 16th Area Army, under Isamu Yokoyama, are responsible for defense from headquarters in Fukuoka. Outside the conference rooms, the blockade is total. Cities are ash-black from conventional raids, shipping is strangled, and rail lines are one broken trestle from paralysis. The assumption in Tokyo on the eve of 6 August is that the home islands can absorb more pain, disperse workshops, and bargain for conditional terms if morale holds. Incendiaries burn neighborhoods, but government and rail usually keep moving. Raids are frequent but survivable. Production can be recited. Discipline can outlast American patience. Across the Pacific, American planning assumes the opposite, a finite set of strikes, each capable of erasing a city core, and its command nerve in one flight will compress time so violently that bargaining language becomes irrelevant. The team on Tinian trains to make the effect repeatable. Pumpkin test drops, weather ships, photo ships, and scripted debriefs are part of the same system that loads the actual devices. The plan's power is not just the blast, but the schedule. On 8 August, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan. In the pre-dawn of 9 August, operations into Manchuria begin. That sequence slices away the last hedge in the cabinet's argument. The bombs and the Soviet offensive are separate tools, but they press from the same direction. They remove time. The Council can no longer promise that holding out one more month will produce better terms. The strikes on 6 and 9 August are not framed as terror, they are framed as closure. Each sortie demonstrates that a one-aircraft mission can exceed the destructiveness of 1,000-plane fire raids, while also severing local command's ability to respond. Staff officers in Hiroshima experience that directly. When telephones stop, radios die, and bridges vanish. Yokoyama's commands on Kyushu, while headquartered in Fukuoka, see the same logic when industrial nodes in the Urakami Valley at Nagasaki fail at once. Regional armies still hold their ranks and maps. They lose the wires that make armies real. The American stake is explicit. If these dates do not move Tokyo, the next step is invasion across Kyushu and then Honshu, with casualty projections that horrify planners on both sides. The blockade continues. More cities go to ash. The young and the old die in measures that settle nothing quickly. The Japanese stake is also explicit. If the cabinet can align around surrender language, an empire can survive as a polity, even as its conquests and ideology collapse. If it cannot align, the country becomes a battlefield. After Hiroshima, Fight On insists that it was one city. After Nagasaki, Fight On must explain how many cities equal honor. This is why the opening shocks matter to the whole war. 2 dates in the same week, each producing immediate paralysis, turn the negotiation script from a list of talking points into a list of illusions. The story lives between 6 and 15 August, 1945, from the first strike to the imperial decision to end it. Hiroshima, 6 August 1945. One aircraft rides a practiced line steady through the initial point, the bay doors opening because the checklist says they open. The sight picture holds the bomb leaves clean, and the pilot begins the escape turn on schedule. What follows is not a spectacular explosion to be watched. It is a sequence. Light arrives without warning and fills every straight line in the city. Skin, cloth, and paper ignite where they are. Then the pressure front arrives not as a roar but as a shove that collapses air and timber together so fast that people fall before they understand they are moving. Bridges that carry the morning trams are no longer bridges. Telephone poles that carry orders are no longer poles. Radios go to silence mid-word because the wires between the words are gone. In the Castle District Field, Marshal Shunroku Hata steps out of a room that has lost its windows. He is alive, which means he is responsible, but the network he commands has been severed at every joint. A staff officer lifts a handset and hears only room tone. Runners try the outer gate and find heat like a wall. A doctor at Shima Hospital puts a hand on a metal instrument and cannot let go because the metal has become an instruction to burn. A streetcar sits on a span that has ceased to exist as a span. Its passengers are still upright, thrown forward by nothing visible, eyes bleached and unfocused. The fire that follows does not have a center. It assembles itself everywhere there is cloth, wood, oil, and breath. The airburst is the point. Detonated above the core, it turns blast and heat into citywide work, not a crater. The first minute kills command. The second minute ensures that rescue is local and blind. Civil defense measures that were built around experience with incendiaries fail because they depend on wires and water and roads that can be counted on after a raid. Here, those are the first things removed. The plan to disperse workshops and keep trains running assumes there will be orders to regroup and trains to receive them. It assumes attacks that come in many waves and leave interludes for action. A one-plane run does not leave interludes. On Tinian, the process that made the run possible does not glow or shout. The 509th Composite Group has rehearsed this with inert pumpkin shapes until the choreography is ordinary. Weather, ship calls, photo ship, tracks, delivery ship, flies the numbers. The crew language is designed to make nothing memorable. Identify, release, turn, climb, check manifold pressure, check fuel. If anyone says anything else, it is because the checklist requires it. Nagasaki, 9 August 1000, 945. The same system, the same intention, flown under a different sky. Clouds force the crew to abandon Kokura and hunt a break, fuel margins tightening while the weaponeer Commander Frederick Ashworth arms the device because his timeline says it must be armed. The bombardier finds a slit of clarity over the Urakami Valley. The aircraft rolls and climbs on cue, eyes on stopwatches and needles rather than the ground. The detonation is lower than Hiroshima, and the terrain is not a flat grid but a bowl, which means the shock courses across mills, arsenal grounds and housing, with the valley as a sounding board. Steel structures fold as if pushed from inside. Rail spurs kink into dark arcs. A dock crane unthreads itself in a single movement. At Western District Army Headquarters, General Isamu Yokoyama, aides start to count units and discover they are counting paper. Depots cannot be reached. Lines that run along the valley are down in several places at once. A messenger starts in one direction and has to turn back because heat and wind make corners into traps. In a clinic, a corridor goes white and then black and stays black because the generators are gone. The noise is not continuous. It comes in waves and leaves behind a hiss that sounds like nothing living. The second strike matters because it removes the last refuge of coincidence. The profile is the same. One bomb, one airburst, one city's control layer erased in minutes. The crew behavior is the same. Spare words, numbers, called tasks completed. The ground behavior is the same. A search for water and wire and authority that cannot be found. Civil defense again proves effective only after there is a network to coordinate it, and here the network is the target. The difference is geography. The valley focuses damage and complicates rescue by channeling heat and smoke. It also ensures that rails and roads fail in connected stretches rather than in isolated spots, which makes improvisation slower. Across both cities, the body feels a consistent order: light, heat, pressure, dust, then delayed sound. Walls go out and then back in. Eardrums play a note that is not a note. Breath tastes of metal. Orders exist but cannot travel. The armies responsible for these districts survive on rosters, while their means of action vanish. What the crew experiences is measured in seconds and angles. What the ground experiences is measured in the absence of paths. Two dates establish a pattern. The pattern is simple enough to be taught. A single aircraft can remove a city's ability to respond, and it can do so again on demand. That is the combat reality, not spectacle, not luck. Procedure flown twice with the same result. Hiroshima, 6 August 1945. The castle offices are warm already when the windows turn to milk. A junior officer at 2nd General Army reaches for a handset and finds only air because the cord has been pulled from the wall by a force that has no direction. Field Marshal Shunroku Hata steps into a corridor that is not a corridor. The floor is sanded with glass, and the light is not sunlight. He calls for couriers, and the first man staggers forward with his cap on fire and does not notice. Outside, a tram stands exactly where it stopped, mid-span. Its driver's hands fused to a wheel that is now a lesson in temperature. Passengers sit upright without words. At Shima Hospital, a surgeon leans to catch a rolling instrument and burns his palm on steel too hot to argue with. Gauze whispers to flame. The corridor goes white, then black, and the black stays when the generator fails. Dust slides sideways and then hangs as if hooked in the air. The sound arrives late, a single push that shoves through ribs and doors and leaves the ears ringing a long, unbroken note. The way people move changes. Gestures take over because speech has nowhere to travel. A staff map is spread on a table, and all the pins are suddenly metaphor. Bridges are outlines of themselves, and the river is crawling with things that were not meant to float. The officer tries the stairs and turns back because heat makes corners into traps. A hose is dragged from a hydrant that produces nothing but a weak cough. Orders exist on paper, but the paths between the orders and the men are ash. Hata keeps his posture, because posture is what is left. He points to places that are no longer places, and men run by habit toward them. Overhead, the aircraft is already a dwindling shape, and inside it, nobody is narrating. Colonel Paul Tibbets keeps the climb building. Thomas Ferraby has already said the only sentence that mattered and is writing down times because that is what the job requires. Theodore Van Kirk ticks a line on a chart that will not be needed again. George Caron looks back and calls what he sees in syllables short enough to fit between vibrations. Interphone discipline holds bomb away, turn, climb, check manifold, check fuel, check cowl flaps. The crew do not cheer, they complete. They look at needles and at the horizon and at nothing else. Nagasaki, 9 August 1945. The valley is a bowl with cloud for a lid when the lid opens a hand's width. At Western District Army Headquarters, a duty officer watches map pins tremble before the lamps fail, and the doors try to close themselves against a pressure that will not accept an answer. A fitter at the steelworks feels his gloves begin to smoke where the seams meet, and thinks first to take them off, and then discovers he cannot. Rails lift into arcs as if a giant has pinched them and lost interest. A nurse in Urakami counts steps by touch in a stairwell that fills with ash, too fine to be dirt. Sirens begin with confidence and then give up, leaving only a hiss like someone boiling patience. The message path collapses in a more complicated geometry. Roads twist and climb. Each corner is a new problem. The duty officer writes instructions that have no carriers. Messengers go out and are turned back by wind and cinders and the shiver of heat that lives in the next block. A shutter bangs twice and then is gone, and the wall behind it is gone, and the room beyond it is open to a sky that does not have a colour anyone recognizes. People drink from buckets until the buckets glow and are dropped. A man opens his mouth to breathe and inhales grit that tastes like metal coins. Above the ridgelines, a different crew flies the same grammar. Major Charles Sweeney has traded a city for another because weather said so and fuel arithmetic agreed. Commander Frederick Ashworth speaks the arming steps like a locksmith, each syllable a notch, no more, no less. The bombardier finds a slit and stays with it. The release is a word and a pressure on a switch. And then the bank begins, and the climb begins, and the stopwatch does the counting, so the mind does not have to. The second flash is seen as a sheet rather than a picture, and the shock reaches the airframe as a hand on the back. Interphone turn, climb, fuel, bearings, nothing ornamental. The notes written in pencil are thinner than the machine noise around them. What lives in both places is scale and silence. In the cities, the first minute kills the network, and the second minute makes rescue a matter of whoever is still standing within reach. In the aircraft, the first minute after release is numbers, and the second minute is also numbers. The difference is altitude. The sameness is procedure. A conductor pries at a lever with a rag around his hand and the rag lights. A surgeon pulls a mask away and finds it glued to his cheek by heat. A staff officer puts 2 fingers under a man's jaw and does not find anything to count. A crew chief leans into the engineer's panel and calls a value that sounds exactly like the last value he called. 2 dates bracket these moments and give them their meaning. The crews leave the edges of the islands behind, and the columns below them keep rising. On the ground, men try for wire and water and rank and find none of those things available. On the flight decks, checklists close with graphite ticks. The cities talk with smoke, the aircraft talk with numbers. Between them there is the silence that follows something that cannot be argued with. The order path is short enough to trace with a finger on a page. The president sets the guidance. The directive flows through Thomas Handy to Carl Spaatz. Curtis LeMay owns the operational clock for 20th Air Force. The 509th Composite Group on Tinian, commanded by Paul Tibbets, exists to do one thing and to do it on schedule. Around them is Project Alberta, a compact team whose only job is to take inert assemblies and make them into weapons at the last practical moment. None of these names speak in speeches. They sign brief, assemble, load, fly, and record. The reason 2 cities appear on 2 dates inside the same week is not mystique, it is logistics. The airframes are Silverplate B, 29 seconds, lightened in the places that matter with bomb bays altered to carry a single shape that has to clear cleanly. Crews have practiced until their hands move in the same order every time. Before the first live device ever leaves a bay, dozens of pumpkin drops have ironed the timing into habit weather ships to read the sky over each target, photo ships to verify navigation, and bombardier cadence drilled until the interphone can be kept to single words. At North Field, the ground echelons have split the work into parallel flows, assembly in one hut, fuse work in another, loading in the belly of a specific airframe already matched to a specific sortie. The weaponeer speaks an arming sequence that is half liturgy and half engineering, and a clerk behind him writes clean numbers with a pencil. When the first aircraft climbs away, the next cycle on the ground does not wait to see what history thinks. It continues because that is what a cycle does. Redundancy is not decoration, it is the doctrine. Alternate crews are briefed. Alternate aircraft sit with fuel and oxygen and oil where they should be. Alternate targets exist because cloud and wind exist. Kokura turns into weather, and the plan does not break. It pivots and lands on Nagasaki without changing its grammar. The radio nets that matter are short go or no go, wind and cloud release, climb, return. The celebration category is blank in every form. The checklist tone in the cockpit mirrors the checklist tone on the island. A crew chief walks his fingertips along a panel and calls values that sound like instrument faces. Armourers pass each other a safety cotter and speak the word that confirms the handoff. A loader checks a sling twice, and then once again. The weaponeer recites the steps that turn a device into a condition, and the bombardier hears only the parts of those steps he needs to know. When the aircraft rolls to a halt after the first mission debriefs, do not ask for poetry. They ask for headings, timing, wind instruments, systems, photographs. The same questions are used in the second debrief because sameness is the entire point. Doctrine is sometimes a grand word. Here it is a narrow one. Identify the target, stabilize the aircraft, release on the numbers, begin the escape turn, and climb exactly when the clock says. Keep the interphone clean so no syllable steps on a required call. Use weather reconnaissance to decide if the template can be applied to the primary or must be applied to the alternate. Use photographs to confirm effect. Begin preparing the next sortie before the photographs are dry. There is nothing in that sequence that asks for a shout. Across the water, Japanese doctrine for the final defense Ketsugo lives on paper, and in the voices of men who believe that dispersed industry and civil defense and morale can outlast a hostile schedule. The dispersal plan assumes that the enemy must come again and again, that each raid is a wave, that the time between waves can be used to pull wire and lay pipe and drive trucks. It assumes the network will exist after the blast. In the days inside this frame, those assumptions fail, because the first minute of an airburst kills the network, and the second minute fixes the failure by turning roads and rails into joints that no longer bend. A regional army is still an army in a roster book, but without wires and bridges, the army is a map with no lines. Tokyo's decision friction is not imaginary. The Supreme War Council is split. The cabinet is careful with language, because language is all they have left that does not burn. Ministers count clauses because they cannot count divisions. The entry of the Soviet Union slashes the last argument that time favors negotiation. Time now belongs to the side that can schedule the next strike. That is not a metaphor. It is a calendar entry that can be executed because the supply chain sits forward, the crews are rested in rotation, and the next airframe is ready. The American learning loop looks like a factory diagram. Loss leads to adaptation, adaptation hardens into SOP, and SOP is broadcast to every place that can apply it. The habit built in other campaigns, formalize what worked and teach it tomorrow morning, carries straight into this week. The 509th is the end of a line that starts in laboratories and assembly plants and railheads and docks. The virtue of that line is not brilliance but replaceability. If an aircraft is lost, another exists. If a crew is injured, another is trained. If a component fails, a spare is present. Risk is a quantity the system can accept because the system contains replenishment. On the Japanese side, the assets that matter cannot be replenished in days. Experienced staff officers are not a category that can be mass-produced. Depots with fuel and munitions take months to assemble and 1 hour to erase. Rail junctions cannot be replaced by men with carts when the rails have been blown into curves. Dispersion without communication is isolation by another name. A commander may still have rank and map and seal, but no way to exert force beyond his arm's reach. Doctrine in the end is a way of ensuring that the next move looks like the last move that worked. In these dates, that means the cockpit grammar remains identical from the first city to the second. It means the island choreography does not pause after the first report. It means that the men who authorize the violence have already placed their signatures on the next line in case the first line is not enough. The shock that hits the cities is therefore matched by a calm that permeates the base. Both are forms of power, one instantaneous, one procedural. What the record shows is simple. One order runs down a prepared path. One aircraft executes and lands. The machine to do it again is already turning, while the first column of smoke is still climbing. The second aircraft flies and lands. The machine is still turning. One order, two sorties, and the machinery to fly a third. Hiroshima, 6 August 1945. The first minute is light, and then heat, and then air that shoves buildings inward. In the castle district, a handset rises to an officer's ear and gives him only the room's own breath. The wires are gone. He does not shout it. There is no network to carry volume farther than his throat. A runner tries the gate and his cap catches fire. He pats at it, surprised, then runs anyway, and finds that the bridge he needs is a line of hot air over broken water. Field Marshal Shunroku Hata keeps his posture upright, because posture is the last intact command. Maps lie flat and truthful and useless. Orders are written, folded, and set aside because there is no one to carry them. In a hospital corridor, a door opens to a hallway that is white, then black, then only warm wind. A nurse pulls gauze from a shelf, and it turns to flame with a sound like someone breathing out. The second minute begins, and the shape of the city has changed. Rescue becomes the distance between two hands. Civil defense exists, but its pumps and ladders are nouns without verbs. The men who wear armbands do what they can where they stand. They cannot scale. Nagasaki, 9 August 1945. The valley channels the shock, so it arrives like weather. At Western District Army Headquarters, a duty officer leans over a map and watches the pins tremble, then sweep in a small arc, as if the board has remembered it is wood. He writes routes to depots and then crosses them out because the rails kink on the page of his mind where he cannot smooth them. He sends a messenger who returns with eyebrows singed and says the corner by the tram line is a wall of heat. There is no route to the depot. The sentence falls to the tabletop and stays there. At the mills, a fitter tries to pull a hose that has no water and watches his gloves smoke at the seams. In a clinic stairwell, a nurse counts steps by touch because the lights have no source, and the siren began and died and left only a hiss. The city does what wounded bodies do. It isolates damage by becoming many small rooms that cannot hear each other. Between the two dates, the idea that the home islands can absorb and endure narrows to a habit, not a plan. Absorption had been built on experience with fire raids, on the rhythm of nights when planes came in waves and dawn gave you roads and wires to work with. It assumed that dispersal keeps the machine of daily life turning. A single airburst cuts the machine at the spines first. The first minute kills the network. The second minute proves that killing the network is enough. Wardens can direct only those within voice pumps fail. When pipes fail, rail repair crews cannot reach the rails when the roads are broken into hot corners. Tokyo, after the second date, is a room where language begins to shrink. The Cabinet and the Supreme War Council are no longer wagering on words to bend time. Time has bent the words. A minister rubs at his eyes and says time does not create options anymore. The sentence is not a philosophy, it is a report. Men who arrived arguing about conditions look at papers that record hours and radio intercepts and damage reports that are no longer about flames, but about silence. The neutral-mediated settlement they had kept on the table like a talisman is now a story they tell themselves to endure the meeting, not a path. The entry of the Soviet Union, 2 days after Hiroshima takes the last hedge out from under the argument to fight on. The second bomb takes coincidence out from under the argument that the first city was a matter of luck. Together they move the talk from whether to how. Inside the cities, the collapse is not a spectacle but a behavior. A fire crew turns a wheel, and the wheel spins without breaking the valve because the valve is already broken. A tram conductor tries a lever with a rag around his hand, and the rag ignites. A surgeon reaches for a tray and finds that instruments give instructions in a language he cannot refuse. Men at headquarters, who have practiced moving battalions, reduce their movements to hand signals inside a single room. Rank remains, reach does not. Second General Army is a phrase that includes streets that no longer connect. Western District Army is a set of duties that wait for rails that kinked into question marks. Deterrence, which had once been the weight of armies and factories, becomes a sculpture of paper and seals. Across the water, the machine that made the dates possible does not accelerate. It does not need to. Capacity is now the pressure. The crews that could have flown a third sortie do not. They do not need to. The possibility sits on a table like a clock you can hear in the space between sentences. Men in Tokyo hear it. The point has been made twice. Every hour that passes without a decision borrows risk from a future that is now measured in days, not in seasons. The argument that honor requires more ruin must be spoken out loud to be sustained, and rooms in which men can speak out loud are rare in a country that has gone suddenly quiet. Hiroshima's staff learns the shape of defeat, as a practice take in the wounded post. Men at corners, where corners still exist, mark the living with chalk, send for water, return without water. Nagasaki's staff writes routes and erases them, writes names and then initials because the pencil lead is soft and the paper is damp. The collapse of myth is a list of small admissions said under breath. We cannot move. We cannot call. We cannot route a unit to a place that has no name anymore. We cannot wait for better terms from a war that has discovered a way to arrive in 1 minute. The cabinet spends an hour on words that reduce the risk that armed men will interrupt a broadcast. The council spends less time than that deciding that there must be a broadcast. The emperor's advisors know that every door they open is a door that could close again if someone decides the old plan still lives. Language becomes a ladder to the only ground left. In the cities, men drag the wounded through doorways, which is also language, a grammar of hands and feet and breath. The armies that defended those districts still exist in titles. They do not exist in motion. After Nagasaki, there is no later, only the wording of an announcement. 10 August 1945. The note moves through Switzerland and lands on desks in Washington and London, while Tokyo argues over the exact shape of the words. In the ministries, the air is stale, and the ash-traced daylight is the same color as the paper. A draft says surrender with conditions, another removes conditions, a third tries to replace nouns with fog. Men who once discussed fronts now discuss punctuation. Radios carry only music and weather, because the next voice must be the one that ends the war. 14-15 August 1945. Doors are guarded inside the palace. Corridors are watched by men who do not trust each other to accept the hour. The recording is made because a room is found that will hold a microphone and a decision at the same time. Outside, in districts where the streets have been melted into their own shadows, relief becomes a pattern. Water first, then the wounded, then the counting that does not finish. In Hiroshima, officers from Second General Army, who can still stand, move civilians toward open ground, and mark the living with chalk. In Nagasaki, the Western District Army converts units into carriers of food and bandages because movement by formation has no function. A nurse uses a pencil stub to list names and then initials and then descriptions because names fail when people cannot speak. A warden unrolls a hose and finds pressure again, a thin one, enough to name purpose out loud. The broadcast on 15 August is not a drama. It is a logistics event. Antennas have to hold. Stations must switch at the right seconds. The line must be carried without interruption by hands that only yesterday saluted a different set of intentions. The words arrive as if underwater, and still they are understood. In garrisons and depots, officers read them twice, and then write shorter words for men who must stop. A platoon in Kyushu locks its racks. A battery on Honshu lays its pieces level and waits. A commander who thought of roadblocks thinks instead about road clearance. Resistance where it exists is private and immediate, and then it ends because the signal is louder than the room. In the following days, the pattern hardens. Curfews appear first as notices on boards, and then as the way streets look at night. Weapons are gathered because orders say to gather them. Surviving transport is assigned to food, then to medical supply, then to timber and line. Trains move slowly through sections that have forgotten they are trains. A map that once showed frontiers now shows corridors for relief. The police carry lists, the soldiers carry stretchers. The army is still the army on paper, but the verbs have changed. Headquarters send down instructions about order, not attack, and the instructions find routes because the broadcast opened them. At sea and in the air, the United States keeps the quarantine posture and the procedure tone. Sorties that could have been loaded are not loaded. Crews that could have been briefed are stood to routine. The pressure is capacity, not use. It is a clock heard in the quiet proof that the next step was possible and is not required. Islands that were staging grounds become offices. Photographs and debriefs are filed with other photographs and other debriefs. Men write neat lines that say what happened, not what it meant. September approaches, and the country behaves like a place that has been told to hold still. Municipal offices count the living and the dead in columns that do not balance. Farmers move into fields because harvest is a surrender that feeds people. Children carry cans to standpipes that give water in a steady, thin stream. Factories that can run are made to run for simple goods. Rail junctions are bypassed where the rails have turned into questions. Orders to stand down travel faster than rumours that say not to, and that is a kind of victory measured in hours. 2 September 1945. The harbour is flat when the signatures are put down in Tokyo Bay. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signs with a cane at his side. General Yoshijiro Umezu writes his name as if time can be put back into the ink. General Douglas MacArthur reads his lines the way a clerk reads a procedure. Flags hang still enough to be counted. In the cities, the day is like other days, except for the absence of argument on the radio. Men sweep glass into piles. Women wash bandages for the second use they were never meant for. A boy points at the sky because it is empty. What remains is work. Corridors for food and medicine. Lists that will never be complete. Tools that must be made before they can be used to make other tools. The memory that 2 dates closed a war that had been trying to stay open. The war ended inside dates, not paragraphs. The rest is paperwork and quiet.